Hey guys, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is Ankush here from Alif Consulting. Welcome in our Azure Disaster Recovery case study. In this case study, we will be going to talk about how Azure helped one of the healthcare customer to build their disaster recovery on Azure when they were having the infrastructure running on the on-premise data center. So in this video, we will going to talk about we're going to have a customer introduction. We're going to have what are the challenges they were having, then how and why they have started exploring the cloud, what is their DR solutions look like, how their security was there from day one, how they are saving time and money, and how they are setting up a new IT standard after having the disaster recovery on Azure, right? So let's quickly jump into the customer introduction. So this is a hospital, and this customer is basically one of the largest healthcare science center providing the world-class care to around 10,000 people and specialized care to residents, specializing in tertiary level of and specially care. It's partnered with leading research and education institute, right? With its focus on world-class healthcare service, the hospital regularity takes advantage of the latest IT solution. It decided to revamp its system for storing the electronic health record of the patient to enable efficient record sharing between its various sites and the partner network. Known the hospital elected to deploy a EHR system called EPIC. So how this whole journey was started, right? So this customer was a healthcare. They was having a multiple specialization across their healthcare industry. They were having more than 10,000 uh, cares. They were providing a world-class care to more than 10,000 people and specialized into the care of resident, right? At the same time, they were having a multiple partner. They were having the partnership with the leading research and education institute, right? So with providing a focus of world-class healthcare services, this hospital also want to take the advantage of their IT system. So what they did to uh, what they did actually, they deployed the EHR system called EPIC. So what this EPIC application is, this EPIC application is basically used to store the electronic health record of the patient. To use the EPIC, the hospital required a purpose-built hosting infrastructure. Looking at the 10-year cost projection, the project team realized that it could be significantly reduce the cost by hosting the data on premise instead of using the other option, right? So when they see what is the overall cost of ownership look like, they decided to host their data, store their data on the on-premise only. However, the hospital was having a outdated secondary data center and would need invest of millions of investment to make it operational as a disaster recovery site, right? So that's where they have started exploring the cloud. So they were ready to host their data. They were ready to host their primary site on the on-premise where they was having the primary data center running. However, to run the disaster recovery, they need to make their secondary data center operational, and for that they need to do the millions of investment to make it up and running. The need of a the need for a world class, or I would say the best in class disaster recovery system further complicated the project. Across the data or across the environment, access to the data can have a highest stake consequences in a medical setting. So this hospital had to ensure it fully backup every time when every patient record was updated with the latest data. Now, as we know, for a hospital, this uh, health record for any patient is really matter, right? So that's where they want to make sure that the access to the data can have a high stake consequences in a medical setting. So they want to make sure all the data, every patient record should be fully backed up with the latest information. So what are their challenge was there, why they were not able to build the disaster recovery on their own premise in a secondary data center, right? First challenge they were having is outdated secondary data center. Second, need to invert to make it operation as a disaster recovery site. So they need to make a lot of investment. They need to invest a lot of money to make the disaster recovery site operational. Backup solution is need to introduce to ensure all the data is fully backed. All data need to keep in the same country due to the local reg regulations. So these are the challenge which customer was having. Now what they did, right? So to avoid the investment in their secondary data center, they have started exploring the cloud, right? So what they did, they avoid the expensive on-premise hosting costs for disaster recovery. The project team begin to look at a cloud infrastructure as an alternative. We did a high level of cost analysis comparing Microsoft Azure pricing versus the hardware purchasing cost. Even early on, we saw a 40% of saving, right? So when we compared what is their overall cost is going to be when they're investing their money to make a secondary data center up and operational with the cloud infrastructure, we see a 40% of cost savings within both of them. 6 months before Epic go live date, the hospital have decided to host its disaster recovery system fully in Microsoft Azure. That's provides of Epic has a never supported a cloud-based project of this type of before, making the installation one of the first of its kind. So the Epic software which this hospital was using to store the patient's healthcare record was never hosted on the Azure. That Epic software was never built it on the Azure for the disaster recovery. The software were always running on the on-premise data center, and this was a kind of one project where Epic was having a disaster recovery on the Azure. So it was a one of the project, right? So that's where they have started exploring. They have started investing money on Azure. They started using the Azure Site Recovery solution for the disaster recovery. Now let's talk about the disaster recovery solution, right? To build the disaster recovery infrastructure, project team took the advantage of Azure infrastructure as a service capability. With Azure, IT team can quickly build a high secure environment that scale up and scale down with demand. That means the hospital only pays for the resources it used, and it can expand its capabilities without procuring the additional hardware, right? The hospital uses several other Microsoft technologies, including the hosting the Citrix in on Azure and Azure storage for medical imaging. The solution also continuously syncing the on-premise and disaster recovery databases, carrying or creating a mirror image of every EHR that updated in a real time, right? And the hospital was or is using Azure Site Recovery to deploy failover and the recovery processes should a data loss incident occur. So hospital was not relying only on the disaster recovery, they were also using the other services like Citrix on Azure. They were also using the Azure storages for medical imaging, right? With their Azure Site Recovery, they have deployed the failover and recovery processes on the Azure in case of anything goes wrong or anything happen on a primary site. Azure Site Recovery provide them a capability to do the failover and the recovery process. The all the infrastructure is basically built using the M series virtual machine. The hospital saw that M series are the best in class of virtual machine and determined it was necessary to support the database that Epic use. At the time, it was a very new. Microsoft stepped in and made it available for the hospital, and it was very critical. So they start using the Azure Site Recovery to doing the failover and doing the recovery process. But when they analyze, they need to have a M series VM for the Epic databases because that's how the Epic database is required to require the databases on Azure. And earlier, those M series was not available, so Microsoft have stepped in and make it available for the customer, and that was one of the critical point because if those M series VM was not available on the Azure on that time, customer was not able to host the disaster recovery using the Azure Site Recovery. Now this is how their high level disaster recovery design looks like. So they was running the on-premise uh, VMs like Dynamics, DNS, SQL, SharePoint, and Linux VMs, and then they were using the Azure Site Recovery to replicate them to the Azure by using the Site Recovery replication. And then they were having a VPN tunnel, they were having the Active Directory replication, they were having the always on SQL always on cluster to make the database replication and available at the both site. Uh, One of the biggest point for this hospital was having the security from the day one. So using the capability of Azure, project team have basically decided and project team want tight their security of its cloud environment. For the example, the hospital benefit from firewalls built into Azure, but hospital and Alif Consulting also build the cloud infrastructure in a way that help isolated it from the outer access. So customer was only hosting the DR on the Azure, but they also want the security from the day one, like how the data is going to be synced, how their data is going to be traveled, how VMs is going to access the internet, right? So that's where we work with this hospital and help them to build the infrastructure in the way that help them to isolate their environment from the outer side, and they can have their restricted access of this outer services for their workloads running on the Azure for disaster recovery. Security and compliances are the one of the importance and one of the required parameters for their healthcare customer, especially when it comes to the patient data such as a medical imaging and the EHR system. Customer have built the Azure environment for the hospital to best-in-class security standard with advanced cloud security management and automation capability for their mission-critical project. As an added security benefit, hospital use Azure to meet the compliance obligations with the personal health information protection by using the Azure policies, because that's where they're applying these personal health information protection policies or the compliances on Azure resources, so that they can say if they are missing any capabilities or if they are having any compliance issue, so that they can fix it, right? So that's where they have put it security from the day one, as soon as they have started building the Azure DR capability for their Epic application. Saving time and money, yes, that's one of the thing. Carry out with this initiative, running the disaster recovery on Azure, have led them to have a significant cost saving, right? To use the on-premise data center, you have to make this huge investment to start using the technology. With the cloud, you don't need to stock up on the component. You can just go ahead and leverage the technology right away, right? So that was a challenge, right? So that's where have saved the money, they have saved the time, right? Because if they go with the disaster recovery or with their on-premise secondary data center, they need to invest the millions of money, they need to invest the time, which is eventually can lead them a delay of hosting the disaster recovery for their Epic application. But by having or running the disaster recovery on a cloud, they were saving their time and money because they don't need to invest the upfront cost, they don't need to invest their time to make uh, the site up and running, because that's how cloud is. You can log in into the cloud services, you can subscribe for cloud service, log in into the Azure portal, and then from there you can start using the services. With moving to Azure, hospital cut its data backup cost by half. They were able to save a lot of money. I would say around the 50% of cost by hosting the disaster recovery environment for the Epic application on Azure and other critical systems, right? So with this backup cost, with this disaster recovery cost, they were able to save up to 50% cost, not only for the Epic application, but other critical environment or systems like Citrix on Azure and Azure Storage Account for their images. Other than that, database that are always on and always syncing, they can spin down the whole virtualized environment. So it's an ideal, right? And it were very cost effective, right? So they were running the database in always on, right? So they can spin down. So let's take an example. If they need to save some cost, they don't want to run database on always running on, right? So they want to save some cost, they can simply go ahead and shut down or spin down or scale down the size of the virtualized environment, and then they can save the lot more cost of the Azure infrastructure which is running for the disaster recovery, right? So that's how they are saving their time and money on the for the Epic application disaster recovery running on Azure cloud. With this one, they are setting up a new standard for the IT. The Epic application disaster recovery solution went live, and while migration continues, Hospital and Alif Consulting consider both of them to be a landmark projects. Built in 3 months, the infrastructure will be back up 70 terabytes of data, making a real-time update to the files while supporting up to 5,300 concurrent users. It's clear that hospital take world-class care of its data, just like it does with its parent, this patients, right? So with this Epic disaster recovery project, now this customer is working with us, and they want us to build a lot more things. They want to help to back up around 70 TB of data. They want help them to making the real-time update of files while supporting the 5,300 concurrent users for their application. And that's how they basically uh, take the advantage of using the IT service to provide the world-class care of patient and a world-class care of its data. Well, that's it in this case study. I hope you like this video. If you like, please click on like and subscribe for more upcoming videos, and feel free to reach us if you have any questions. Thank you.